What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Digital Wildcatters.
Is it summer yet?
It's
BDE.
summer because I'm not in Nantucket, so I'm pissed. It's 100 degrees already.
Got Nantucket here.
Why are you not in Nantucket yet?
I have stuff to do, man. Like, I'm working these days, and I'm trying to figure out, do I drink tequila, bourbon, or a Scottish whiskey?
What are you going to drink on the show?
It's also 9:30 in the morning.
Oh,
Shit, it's 9:45 in the morning. I'm sorry,
Ball.
Scotch.
Exactly, Scotch.
Good movie, Paul.
I saw yesterday this clip come up on Twitter of Dave Portnoy. It's an old clip, but it's like when they're having like these protests and the guy's like anti-capitalism, and Dave Portnoy is like, well, don't you think a guy like me that's, you know, worked as hard as I have, like I deserve to be rich? He's like, because, you know, I'm really rich. He's like, you know, I live in Nantucket, and the guy's like, I don't think that you should be able to exploit people's labor to you know, gain in life. And Dave Portnoy just looks at him. He's like, you ever been to Nantucket?
Speaking of elitist places, I don't know if you guys are now F1 fans, but since I've been watching, I mean, when I was at Shell, like we sponsored the Ferrari team.
Mm-hmm.
And I had opportunities to go to a lot of F1 races, and I didn't do it. Then I started watching this Netflix show, and I'm fucking all in, man.
You know who is the biggest fan of the Netflix show? Priest Patrick.
Really?
Yeah, Patrick loves the F1 stuff.
Dude, it is so cool because I love to race out on I-10, and it's pretty fun. But Ferrari team won this week in Monaco. Charles Leclerc, who's a local Monaco citizen, which I don't know what you call a local Monaco citizen. I should look that up. Congratulations, Shell.
Nice.
So you'll appreciate this. My grandfather was a race car driver, and growing up, every time I go to his house, it's just NASCAR on. I mean, all day. And like as a kid, I fucking hated that, right? And anyways, my grandpa is your typical like grizzlied oil field dude, and I was with him last year or 2 years ago, and he's watching F1, and I was like, hey, everyone's watching F1 now. He's like, really? I was like, yeah, you know, they came out with this Netflix show, and so everyone's just all about Formula One. And he's like, I've been watching this for 20 years. I was like, I know, you got all the hipsters like Kirk that all of a sudden,
Dude, I'm totally
fans.
So you know,
Hey, bullshit, dude. I watched Indy 500 as a kid because our local AJ Foyt, but I thought it was so much more cool to watch these Indy cars than that. I wasn't a NASCAR guy. I don't get it. Like, I raced NASCAR with go-karts. The Indy cars were cool, but Formula One is like the elite of the elite.
Yeah.
I mean, Monaco, like if you look outside, it's like billionaire. Like it's like who has the most money? Well, we're not in Monaco for a reason because we can't hang there. Chuck could maybe in this.
See the 500
back in
finish
the old
yesterday?
days. Yeah.
I heard the 500 was the second. It's a repeat for the Penske team.
Yeah.
So there's
Slingshot.
So ESPN
was.
started off life as high school sports on TV, on cable in the late 70s. And what propelled them to, you know, all sports and the pedestal it reached at some point was auto racing. That was their first big hit that kind of got them a national audience. And there's a great memo by the VP of marketing talking about, should we sign this racing contract, you know, to televise it? And the guy says, no, we shouldn't, blah, blah, blah. Nobody's going to watch this. It's like 12 pages of that. And the last line is, who the hell's going to watch a bunch of left turns? Former vice president of marketing at ESPN.
NASCAR and Formula One brought to you by oil and gas. So,
Dude, NASCAR, by the way, is super loyal. I was working at a startup, a tech startup in Austin. And one of our attorneys, she was drinking a Pepsi. And I was like, whoa, Pepsi in Austin? Like, that doesn't even equate. Like, that's a Northeast drink. Speaking of Coca-Cola, I was like, why do you drink Pepsi? She's like, and I don't remember the guy's name, but it's like, so-and-so drinks it, so I drink it. I'm like, dude, you went to law school and you work here and you drink Pepsi because your favorite NASCAR driver drinks Pepsi? She goes, yeah, like.
The greatest thing about NASCAR is not that they talk about like a driver. They talk about that damn number 7 car.
Wasn't Jeff Gordon a
that
Pepsi
damn
guy?
Jeff Gordon.
It's Jeff Gordon.
How did you know, dude?
Pretty boy.
Just
You
fucking
are
told you
such a
my
neck card,
24
dude.
car.
my grandfather is hardcore NASCAR.
Dude, you really are oil patch, bro.
So
You drink Pepsi?
I don't drink Cokes really much anyways. But there was something I was gonna say. Oh yeah. Rig Up.
Oh gosh.
Rig Up, like when they got their $1 billion valuation, oil and gas tech platform in Austin, went and sponsored a NASCAR and it had Rig Up on it. And I was just like, it was funny because Rig Up is full of a lot of Silicon Valley type tech people. And I was like, who's the marketing director? They're like, how can we get in front of these redneck oil and gas workers? Let's go sponsor a NASCAR.
I see Colin sitting there going, looking down at those guys for sponsoring NASCAR. Now Formula One, Digital Wildcatters can sponsor.
I mean, I'm giving cred
it's a lot sexier.
for Colin sponsoring a PGA Tour event. So thank you, Colin. He
There you
did.
go. I'm
Yeah,
a man
it
of-
went up
the
a
day
level.
the day we signed that contract's the day I sell my shares. No offense to golf. It's just
Damn, Chuck.
that's always
All right, what do we got in energy
all right.
news?
Number one, Scott Sheffield, former CEO of Pioneer, now that the merger is done, has actually written a response to the FTC, as we reported previously on BDE. The FTC came out and said, we're not going to let Scott be on the board. He colluded with OPEC and others to drive up oil prices. Therefore, he's not allowed on the board. Scott, to his credit, didn't fight it. Said, okay, guys, this is the best interest of the Pioneer shareholders. He decided not to join the board of Exxon. I, agreed to the FTC's demands. He's written his response back. And it's kind of wild. I mean, I just saw it. But, they talk about hundreds and hundreds of texts with OPEC and government officials and all this. Supposedly there's a big text thread where people send articles to each other. So these hundreds of texts are like, hey, did you see this in Forbes? Hey, did you see this investor presentation? He says in there that when he went through all the texts, there were 2 texts with other oilmen. One was Brian, his son, and the other one was a CEO of a small E&P company that said, hey, man, congratulations on the deal,
Yeah.
And
So
he said one other thing and then fire away. He said the FTC interviewed him for 4 hours. They never asked him about any of these statements. And it seems like this whole thing on collusion was really 2 things. Number one, it was investors saying capital discipline, and so Scott's sitting there talking, hey, we got to be careful, capital discipline and all. And then the second thing is after the pandemic, so minus $37 oil, Scott did organize a group to try to go to the Railroad Commission and say, hey, we need, extraordinary measures here, limiting production, whatever.
Which is all public.
proration.
Which is all,
It was all public.
We
There was a
basically
public
need
hearing.
we need
on Twitter.
proration.
We had a watch party. We watched it live. And we're tweeting about it. Like that was all public.
Yeah, and there was one text supposedly to an OPEC official of some sort saying, hey, we're doing this. This is the time of the meeting.
This is when we launched BroPEC.
Bro,
That's right.
Yeah. We actually got it. The Department of Energy thought it was funny as shit. And the whole idea for BroPEC was to get American E&Ps on the same page for capital discipline and stop drilling. And so be really funny if someday that comes to bite me in the ass. It's like, oh, Colin was trying to collude and raise oil prices by launching BroPEC. Like it's honestly like on the kind of the same level of absurdity.
He was
to be
clearly
honest.
trying to collude with this fella, Alberta Garbage, and the U.S. and Canada coming together. I mean,
Yeah.
this is just ridiculous. I'll go on the rant and then I'll shut up because I've ranted enough about this. But I forget when we hit trough production in America, 09, 10, 11, wherever it was. And we doubled oil production since then. And the rest of the world didn't grow any production except the Russians and the Saudis. But the whole rest of the world didn't grow production. we'd have had $150 or $200 oil during that period without the shale revolution in America. Where's the fucking FTC saying, hey guys, thanks for that? Because you know who it was? It was a bunch of investors that took a lot of losses. I haven't calculated this, but I guarantee you there was no net income generated in E&P world in the United States during the shale revolution.
Yeah.
Private equity broke even, best case.
The biggest bull run in the history of the United States was subsidized by the private markets investing into cheap American oil and
To
gas.
the benefit of consumers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is what you're, it's the Jack Nicholson line from A Few Good Men. I'd rather you just say thank you. If not, grab a post.
That's right.
So anyway, so I think this is just bullshit, and I'm done.
So
A lot of
in this political season, which is obviously a presidential election year, where does this go?
You'll have Biden running around. I hope this doesn't happen, but are they going to threaten, legal action against Scott?
Sounds like the forensics of what was actually in the base of evidence defined as these text exchanges is pretty flimsy.
Sounds like he's getting railroaded, is what I mean. That's it.
So it was a text chain that a number of industry participants were on. They sent articles around.
It sounds like
Do you know if the
someone
recipients
invited to the
actually
party
read those
and
articles?
pissed.
Yeah, who knows?
Well,
Exactly.
the thing is, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on BDE, is that the FTC, the head of the FTC, Lena Khan, I think is her name. She's hated by Silicon Valley and tech right now too. So they're not making any friends in energy or in Silicon Valley, and so she's blocked a ton of mergers and acquisitions in tech, and this crumbles the entire Silicon Valley ecosystem because you need paths to liquidity, you need acquisitions, or else no one's going to build tech. Like if that's the precedent that you're setting, that hey, you can go out and you can create these big companies that create value for society and for shareholders, but when the time comes, you don't have a path to liquidity. That undermines the entire capitalistic nature of the United States.
When you threaten criminal prosecution against industry leaders that do great things like the shale revolution, guess what? They don't do them anymore, or they go elsewhere.
Yeah.
It's just
That's right.
stupid. This is this has really bothered me, the weaponization of the judicial.
But I think what
or
I was
the
getting back to
Justice Department.
at Mark's question was, is this going to be politicized coming into election season? I don't really see that because I just see the FTC doing these things across the board. So I don't think they, have some hard on or hell bent on coming after oil and gas.
It's
in
enough
Sheffield.
red meat for their base.
I mean,
hey, look what we did.
There's
Yeah.
another huge
We-
story that the Justice Department is involved in, and the headline is Guyana's president welcomes Chevron's bid to buy into the $150 billion oil project. You've got Chevron in the Hess merger. You've got Exxon claiming that they get the original rights to this province in Guyana. What's going to happen? Because Guyana's like, hey, Chevron, come and bid on this stuff.
And the president's like the biggest rock star on the planet after just bitch slapping that BBC reporter. That was great.
So who's going to win Exxon's got its own issues. You've got Chevron Hess merger. What's going to play out? And then you've Guyana being the sort of the reason why they're fighting.
So a ex-Exxon landman who's an anon.
This sounds so sketch.
Yeah.
What's his Twitter handle?
Me and Kurt just had the same reaction.
It gets worse. Who's an anon on Twitter.
Of course.
Reached out, and we actually chatted on the phone about it for a while. He said, I have not read that exact JOA, but he said, I know exactly how we wrote all of them. He said, one, it has a ROFR in there. It just does. Exxon didn't do one without it. He said, number two, it's ironclad. So he's 85% chance Exxon wins in arbitration.
And I think the history was, if I'm thinking back on that conversation, was when they first had JOA template in
70s.
In the 70s, they updated it or revised it, amended it in the 80s to contemplate or include
mergers,
the notion of corporate mergers.
Yeah, because in the 70s, that's how you got around all the ROFRs.
So are we calling it on BDE?
Yeah,
Exxon wins.
All right, that's big.
So one of the great things, when I had constitutional law back at Rice, this guy didn't show up, and he and I tied for the highest grade in the class on the final exam. And Doc C, who's my favorite teacher of all time, looked at me, and I'll just call this guy John. So we were sitting there, and he goes, "All right," and Doc was deaf, so he kind of talked funny. And Doc's like, "All right, you two, Chuck, you at least showed up, and I went down to the bookstore, and you bought the books. I don't know if you read them, but I understand your grade. John, how the hell did you make this grade? You never showed up for class. You didn't even buy all the books." And John just looked at Doc and said, "Hey, Doc, it's constitutional law. The feds always win." So Exxon always wins. We can just say that.
So I'm thinking about this. There's got to be a reality show. It's going to be a Digital Wildcatters backed reality show. It's going to have Darren Woods, ExxonMobil, Mike Worth of Chevron, John Hess, and then we need our boy Scott Sheffield in there. What's the show going to be about?
I'm their butler. Can I be their butler or their driver or something?
I don't know what
But who can take over more land, or Scott, it's like something.
No,
I think this is gonna
trading places.
This is not gonna
even better. Trading places, the reality show.
Oh, that'd be funny shit. Yeah. That'd be awesome.
Either that or it's Game of Thrones in the Permian Basin.
I would want Darren Woods to take over CEO of BP.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. That's what I was at Exxon's campus a while back, and a couple of, had a group of young people there, and they're like, "Hey, we want you to come do a talk on Exxon's campus." And how did they
come to Exxon's campus or do a talk about Exxon's campus?
Come to Exxon's campus and do a talk to like a couple hundred of their employees, and they're like, "We want you to come do a talk."
Or
this might not have been it verbatim, but
round toe, square toe.
Ultimately, like, hey,
round toe, square toe.
Colin, if you were CEO of Exxon, how would you come in here and fuck up the company, like in a good way? Like, like just completely
disruptive.
Disrupt it. Yeah, not fuck it up in a bad way, but just like shake things up.
Hire Jeff Gordon to drive through it.
Jeff Gordon's gonna be COO. They got the cars in the campus already.
All the old memorabilia stuff was cool.
No, it's cool as hell, dude.
Yeah,
Exxon's campus is so baller.
They sponsored a car that was in, I believe, Days of Thunder.
Oh, nice.
Dude, wait. Whoa, you just heard Colin say something. Exxon's campus is so baller.
No,
Who wants to go to?
It's true, man. If they would let us go out there with a camera for like 2 days and just shoot all that, nobody'd want to go to Silicon Valley.
Let me tell you
anymore.
something. I've been there. Aramark, great. The restaurants are just like any Aramark. I mean, I feel like I'm in any other stadium, any other big company. But that's the problem with these mega campuses, is that all you see is your fellow people, versus going and seeing other people you interact with and getting good ideas. That's one of the challenges, is that it's all the same people that have been with the same culture.
Yeah.
There's no innovation because it's Chuck. We think the same.
I'm going to push back on that a little bit. Because like when we walked in
You're wrong, Chuck.
I mean, the head of M&A was sitting right there, and he had like
the
12 bankers.
The collisions that happened were crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, people want to go out to that campus, and so they're inviting people on.
Okay.
There's more interaction.
Let me step back and ask you just one question.
Yeah.
Do you really want to go on that campus? Because the moment you hit the campus, and it's about 30 miles from the entrance to the actual parking garage, you're on camera and they monitor your speed
24/7.
Yeah. Do you like that?
Chuck got a ticket for not holding the handrail one time.
Yeah, I did.
I'm like, I can't even. It takes me an hour to get from the campus to the inside.
But all right, hear me out here. One, Exxon is fucking up royally by not letting us come shoot a podcast in the remote operating center. They are controlling, I think it was 12 deepwater drill ships all around the world from one room, steering the bit, not just making decisions. They're actually steering the bit. And so in the room, you got your Halliburton, your Schlumberger, your NOV teams, all there like it's a service room on an offshore rig. And it's absolutely mind blowing. And I'm like, hey, y'all need to let me come record a podcast. So no, they won't let us do that. I'm like, hey, if nothing else, let us record it so that your employees internally can see what's going on down here. And like, no, they won't let us do that.
Yeah.
It's like, why would you not tell that story? One of the most complex and technologically advanced operations, and you don't want to.
You know what the singular thing I found most impressive about us being in that room, the technology was awesome and all that. Exxon had service providers, service companies cooperating with each other across rigs. So like,
because that's how it happens on a fucking offshore rig. This is what's so crazy to me.
This drill ship just sees something, they're telling the other people.
Yeah.
And that's what our industry needs way more of.
But that's what happens out on rigs. Like you go out to an offshore rig, you have a service room and all your service providers are in there.
How many durable oil field patents are there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And how much fast following of things like completion techniques and
I mean,
formulas.
The entire industry is fast following.
Yeah. It's ultra fast following.
So,
well,
but
actually,
the probability of that actually ever happening is about the same level as Mark Andreessen responding to one of Chuck's DMs.
Yeah.
Now I'm hurt.
He's like, some anon keeps like hitting me up.
Who is this that they call fatty?
I will say, based on not so recent past experience, Kirk's right.
Yeah, fair enough.
Saudi Arabia has announced that they're raising another 10 to 20 billion in fresh Aramco stock. Interesting. The country's running out of short-term cash because they're building a mega city. They're building an airline.
Is the mega city the cylinder?
They're taking over the world of golf. There's something else they're doing that's pretty interesting. Oh, they're trying to like build like a chip manufacturing plant. I'm curious, like Aramco needs cash. So in the golf world, that I spend a lot of time in, they're like, Saudi Arabia has unlimited money. The PIF. I'm like, they do have a lot of money, but you can also spend all that money. And clearly, Saudi Arabia is figuring out how to do it.
Well, if you look at the demographic of the population, it's pretty young, relatively high kind of social cost burden. And so that's the thing that was never talked about over the course of long history of OPEC and particularly Saudi discussions is that, I remember the drowning in oil cover of The Economist, and they talked about, Saudi cost of production of $5 a barrel. It's not really, because there's so much stacked on top of that.
So many benefits and handouts.
Well, it's paying for political stability.
Right.
Right. So that hasn't changed. I want to talk about
let me do this because you're an engineer and you're going to be able to explain it. So I'm going to tell you what I heard.
If it's 10,000 feet underground and I can't see it, maybe so.
There you go. Perfect. So Trinity Gas Storage had me out to talk to their user meeting, and Trinity's building and it'll go operational before the end of the year. Big gas storage facility, the first one to open in Texas in 10 or 15 years, something like this. And they had all the participants, customers, vendors, all that out to play golf and just kind of have an update on the project. And they had me speak, and I scared the shit out of them and said, we're not going to be in the natural gas business in 10 years unless we learn how to sell electrons. We'll talk that story at some point. But it was interesting what I heard from natural gas guys, and I'm going to booger this all up, Mark, so translate. But supposedly the natural gas coming out of the Permian is like 3% nitrogen, which doesn't run efficiently through our LNG export facilities like Freeport, etc. And that's what's causing a lot of the delays and the downtime at Freeport is having to process the nitrogen. And I mean, yeah, cryo can get the nitrogen out of it, but at the end of the day, that's a lot of capital. Mm-hmm. And so it's really discombobulating the economics of LNG exports. And supposedly this is a really big deal. I haven't seen a lot of articles about it or Twitter stuff about it, but the guy says this is going to be the big narrative kind of for the rest of the year.
I just pulled an RBN piece from last September, I think September 27, Rusty Brazil's firm, RBN Energy. And it's on this topic. Of course, it's behind the paywall in terms of the details, but the gist of what I could get from the abstract was more about, look, more nitrogen takes up more space in liquefaction that would otherwise be occupied by value methane. And so it lowers the heating value ultimately of the cargo. So it puts more pressure on your economics. And we can talk about something else that's more recent that's putting pressure on LNG economics. But I haven't dug into the technical details around the cryo process and liquefaction. If there is something, do know that the nitrogen content of the Midland Basin, where most of the recent growth has come from, is highly variable. So it's a bit all over the map on a well level basis or a lease level basis. But yeah, I think it's more of an economic issue of, look, I've got to have 100% of that space or as close to 100% of that space with value product defined as methane.
The other things that were said is just, as we're getting into more tail production of oil, I mean, we've reported on this, that, the wells are just becoming gassier, and the gassier wells later in life, more nitrogen showing up in there. So that was another thing said. To your economic point, it's like there supposedly is operational issues with 3% nitrogen. It just doesn't work. And so Freeport's supposedly trying to just drop the nitrogen out by having it run. I don't even know what that means. But the talk is, call it $500 million or $1 billion worth of cryo type stuff necessary. And that's really discombobulating economics.
Not much of a chemist, but I think because it is inert, it's really hard to deal with. It doesn't react to anything.
Yeah.
So
don't you think the finance guys would have figured this out about the content of the Permian?
Well, I think
if it's changing.
Well, when they were
if it's changing,
it's changing because it's the new drilling is finding more nitrogen as well as the later in life tails.
And that has more nitrogen.
It has more nitrogen. So all this gas showing up is different than what they planned for. Supposedly the plants that have been approved but aren't yet haven't started construction have taken this problem into account, but the existing infrastructure supposedly has some problems there. So I may be wrong on this, but this is kind of what I heard from out there.
Yeah.
So I was on a panel last week for the Society of Petroleum Engineers to talk about AI.
Let's go.
It's funny because there's an article that has come out talking about how Google's AI says that it's healthy to eat one rock a day. That some people say that running with scissors is safe.
Wait. Did you see on the one where it said it was healthy to eat one rock a day? One of the sources was from ResFrac, which is a friend of ours. Mark McClure over there. I meant to send it to him, but it used ResFrac as a source. And I was like, that's funny. That's some oil and gas technology.
In order to get cheese to stick to pizza, you should use 1/8 of a cup of non-toxic glue. So I was talking about Collide. I was like, one of the, and let me know if this is accurate, but I was like, Collide's amazing because there are no hallucinations. And that's a really big deal. I mean, and a hallucination is stuff like this, like it's healthy to eat a rock a day, like that.
Well, no, I'm going to tell you what's really happening here. And it's not that Collide doesn't have hallucinations. It's that it has energy specific content that it is trying to go in there and find an answer from. What's happening on Google right now is they just signed this huge deal with Reddit to feed their model. And so all of a sudden you have every single shit post that's ever existed on Reddit feeding that thing now. And I've seen this when they started announcing those deals. I was like, how are you going to determine which information in the Reddit knowledge base is valuable and not valuable? How are you going to QA, QC it? And we deal with some of those same problems on Collide as well. But our problem is much smaller because we're focused on energy related content. But it's interesting to see Google's entire business is becoming broken now, and just see a company that's been as dominant
And
as
they don't
have.
care.
And it seems like they don't fucking care.
That's the thing that gets me.
So give me a couple examples of like the power of Collide and what your AI has been able to do.
Yeah, so I posted this example the other day. I was sitting in here with a couple directional drillers, and they were just like geeking out on it. And they asked a question. It says, "I'm stuck in the hole. What do I do now?" And Collide GPT said, "All right, if you're stuck in the hole, you need to start working your jars like this." Gave step-by-step instructions on how to get unstuck. And the guy's like, "Holy shit, like that's accurate." And then I go to ChatGPT and I say, "I'm stuck in the hole. What do I do now?" ChatGPT had no context of what I was talking about. It thought I was stuck in a mud hole in my car. So it's like, okay, you need to turn your wheels to the left. And so, our bot already has contextual understanding that this is related to energy. It's got energy specific content that you can get right answers like that. And so what's been interesting is like, I have some production engineers that are just beating the shit out of it right now. I mean, asking like super tough technical questions. And they'll compare that to Copilot or ChatGPT, and Collide will get the answers wrong, but even when it's wrong, it's still more directionally correct than Copilot and Microsoft. And, like it'll return a formula and it'll be the right formula, but it'll transpose one of the variables and put something else in there. And so, it'll be like, those are the things that we're working on right now is fine tuning it. But the problem that you're having, the internet, when I saw ChatGPT get released 1.5 to 2 years ago, my first thought was this changes the way that data and content is structured on the internet. Mm-hmm. And, the reason that ChatGPT was so good at coding was because it was trained on Stack Overflow's coding knowledge base.
Which also has it's the communication between the different developers talking about why they've come up with this certain code.
Yeah, had a lot of context.
It's the context.
Had a lot of context and you created this deep brain. That's the same thing that we want to do for the energy industry. But yeah, I was talking to a VC who just thinks that, Reddit's going to be the most valuable tech platform since going IPO. And I look at it and I'm like, man,
a lot of shit data in there.
It's a lot of shit data in there. You ever been on Reddit before? Holy shit, there's some stupid people on there.
I think that was we had a Paraveda guy. We had NVIDIA on this panel, and then me, of course. I mean, me and NVIDIA, which I've fought with NVIDIA. I have a good story there, but I'm not going to talk about it today. What's interesting is they all came to the conclusion that shit data no AI in the world can help you if you have shit data.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the underlying rule always with software is if you have shit going in, you're going to get shit going
I mean, that's where we spend a lot of our money right now is on data ingestion. How are we embedding this information, chunking it, and then there'll be even more.
So that rule alone
it's the foundation of your context.
That says that Reddit basically is 98% bullshit, because every Reddit has the most, people are like, crazy.
Two things though on AI. So I'm reading a book called Co-Intelligence right now, and it's a business school professor in layman's terms kind of walking through
reading or listening, Chuck.
I'm listening.
Okay.
I'm in the car a lot.
I know you are.
Anyway. So two things that I didn't appreciate that y'all will say, no shit, Sherlock. But two things I didn't appreciate is one, all AI really is kind of probabilistically choosing what the next word will be. That's what a language model does. A language model sees, sentences and phrases and stuff and gives it weightings. And so then when it's later asked something near that, there's a such and such probability I choose this. That's why it's different every time you ask a question, etc. But it can't tell whether something's a lie or not, true or false. Doesn't really handle humor, although it's getting a lot better at that. So kind of those subtle things. The second thing that this guy makes the point on that I think is really, really important is He says, assume the version of AI you're working with right now is the worst version of AI you will ever work with in your life, because it really is getting better kind of every day.
But
So-
back to the kind of root point, if you're building that contextual foundation on garbage,
Yeah.
and contextualizing is
Yeah.
which is interesting. If we
given
go,
the
if we
kind
go
of
back
stuck
to
pipe
Collide,
example.
if you're stuck in a hole, one would argue, I'm going to get all the data sources in the planet to give you a good answer. And what Collide is saying, no, we only source from people within the industry. I don't know if we're checking all credentials, but this industry is very clear of you have to come in with experience. And there's been companies that have come in that had no experience in oil and gas, but had all these math models and these things that would predict, flow and all this bullshit for shale that were wrong
Yeah.
because they didn't have contextual experience. And that's something that's really important. Why probably Collide is going to be a better platform than anything
Well,
else.
the asset class is different too, in that the model that you're dealing with is not something you built with precision. I'm talking about the subsurface primarily, right? So there's all kinds of important context that you pick up as a deep specialist on the fly because it's your first experience with that, and it's some curveball that Mother Nature has thrown you.
So I don't know if it drops tomorrow or if it drops next week, but in the next couple of weeks, I had the head of AI for Intel. We recorded a podcast.
Awesome.
What's fascinating is there are very, very smart people he respects on both sides of this argument. There is one argument that ultimately these massively trained language models that have just been trained and trained will ultimately be the panacea for everything. So you will ultimately get a better answer. Today, you get a better answer out of Collide about how do you pull out of the hole versus a massive language model today. But ultimately, the massively trained language model on everything will win out. Really smart people thinking that. Equal numbers of really smart and respected people are the other side. No, we want specific small databases to handle specific problems. And it'll be like the cell phone companies. There'll be like 3 or 4 big, massive language models, but ultimately it's going to be these specific, subject matter type stuff. So anyway, it was fascinating to talk about that because that has massive implications for energy use. If we're going to have 1 million massively trained language models, that's a lot of energy. If we have these small, specific little models with databases, a lot less energy. So anyway,
There you go.
yeah, it's a good one. All right, what else on the agenda, Mark?
Let's you raised it when we came in the room. Let's talk about the transportation secretary and his discussion on what's going on with the massive EV charger build out.
Yeah, it was on CBS's Face the Nation, but host Margaret Brennan asked Secretary Pete Buttigieg, how do you explain the utter failure thus far of the Biden administration to install just 7 or 8 high-speed EV charging stations in 3 years, despite having a massive $7.5 billion of money to do it? Well, he didn't have a good answer, except the fact that he said it's really hard because you actually have to dig into the ground and you have to be like a utility.
Yeah, you don't just, his words, plunk these things down. And his ultimate non-answer was, well, we're targeting 500,000 of these charging stations by 2030. So
here's my question. Momentum has gone backwards on EV car sales. We called it first here, by the way. We were at least a month ahead of the entire industry, the world, talking about how EV car sales are stalling. Great. There's 7 to 8 government built EV charging stations. Let's say there is 500,000, which there's no way based on the government's current capability, but let's say they build 500,000 chargers. Will it be too late? Or is this just the pause in EV car sales?
I think until we get grid figured out and we're doing things like threatening massive tariffs on competitive alternatives,
Mm-hmm.
then I think it may be temporary, but it feels pretty structural at this point.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this will be real interesting to see the next 5 years play out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, because one of the things I said in that speech to the gas storage folks was, I truly don't believe the existing utility players are capable of solving the big problem if we have the world where we need tons and tons more electricity.
Well, there's a structural issue with utilities by nature. There are monopolies
and all the regulatory bodies surrounding it that governs electricity has the same exact mindset. Regulated monopolies.
That's correct.
So my question is, I guess technically an LP in the IRA to the GP that made the decision. Why'd you call capital so early?
Yeah,
right.
Because I can charge management
because
fees.
there's overhead. Yeah, hell yeah.
Exactly.
Bureaucracy.
Speaking of costs, want to go back to LNG. There was a fairly, I think, important event in the form of Zachry, which is a legacy engineering construction firm based in San Antonio. They're 28th on the top 400 contractors list. They had revenues last year of $5.4 billion. They filed for Chapter 11 due to looming insolvency issues related to the Golden Pass LNG project, which is 70% owned by the Qataris and 30% by Exxon. And so, they're citing everything we've heard about other energy-related projects in particular and the viability of those, which are inflation, cost overruns, material costs, et cetera, et cetera. And so they quickly dug themselves a hole because they're having to pay for things unanticipated. And then, as I understand it, a change to the completion schedule timeline. So there was a lot of pressure to accelerate things. They're one of 3 contractors on Golden Pass. Chiyota's one, and I believe McDermott is the other. And so activity is continuing, but I just think that kind of thinking about this ramp up of LNG liquefaction projects that we've talked about in the context of the Biden administration pause on new permits. I thought it was interesting that John Arnold tweeted out last week that, basically we're talking about something, meaning the pause being good political theater, but in reality, it's just not all that impactful from a financial decision or investment opportunity standpoint. So he had some good stats in there. We've got 14 BCF a day of liquefaction capacity operational today, 17 in permit or permitted and under construction. So you're at 31 BCF a day. Another 15 BCF a day has been permitted and not yet in construction. And then what's really affected by the pause is about 11 BCF a day. So his point is, look, there's no financial incentive to get involved in these very long horizon ideas or concepts beyond what's already been permitted. In fact, we've got, I believe I can infer from his view, we're never going to get to kind of a rational completion of what's already been permitted. And so I think there's a looming sunk cost risk. We'll see. We've talked about it as before being the pause being because of some alternative suppliers stepping in and talking about agreements, long-term offtake agreements that, the U.S. is ceding market share. I just think it has a lot of interesting things to think about as it relates to the gas market, et cetera.
I mean, you're taking, the one of the most volatile commodities in the world. I mean, gas, I don't know if it's second to oil, but it definitely is Well, actually, it's probably not even close to second because it's not as variable. However, you're making long 30, 50-year bets on a commodity that changes. But there's always been this bet because of the shale revolution that we're long gas, which I think we're all here saying, of course, it's been playing out over a decade. Yeah, we're long gas. That gas is going to be valuable in the rest of the world because no one else can get it out cheaper. No one has discovered in Europe and Asia. So in some ways, it makes sense. You got to build as many. I think that's what a lot of these big money said. We think that's worth the risk. We'll go try to get offtake agreements to fund the sunk cost, which is the development of these projects. It makes sense. But what doesn't always happen is the political risk. And there's been a lot of political risks that slowed these projects down, which might make these projects underwater.
Well,
not to mention
bankrupt EPC companies.
Yeah.
And I think your market share thing is real. It's not a BS made up thing, because I'm starting to dig into the Beetaloo Basin. I think that's how you pronounce it, in Australia. I mean,
we've been all following that one.
You've got U.S. shale guys. You know who was one of the first to get over there and start stirring the pot on this? Aubrey McClendon.
Of course.
Over there, I mean, I think there's been $500 million, something like that. Hess was messing around in it. You had Aubrey messing around with it. You got a company now, you've got various other U.S. shale people, more to come on this. But that thing could be bigger than the Marcellus.
There's a lot of gas.
There's a lot of gas over there. And if we allow...
Especially after Tex-Mex, there's a lot of gas. Bro.
Exactly. But if we, if we put a brake on LNG, we don't sign up customers, they're going to look elsewhere.
And they're going elsewhere.
They're going elsewhere.
And Middle East will take it. Okay. I have a question. I'm going to put you guys on the spot.
All right.
It's summertime, so I like to read a little bit more about relationships, things like this.
Okay, great.
But I've been reading about this relationship that it just baffles me. It's the Rockefeller fortune. Miranda Kaiser, she was busy raising her children in Florence, Italy, which probably nice. When her brother presented her with a dying wish almost 5 years ago, he had terminal brain cancer, and he asked his only sibling to become the new standard bearer for the campaign he'd started against Exxon. So the Rockefeller family has been fighting Exxon because they believe they've been deceptive about climate change and the responsibility for its consequences. So I'm just curious. You're 5 generations and going to be probably forever wealthy because the wealthiest person on the entire planet created Standard Oil, which many will credit in saying Standard Oil, Exxon is Standard Oil, the most likely.
Sanjay.
So you're fighting, your family's inheritance and wealth came from oil and gas. And now your fight and what you're spending resources on is to fight what your ultimate heir, what your the original founder, Rockefeller, started. Give me your...
You have kids. I have kids. This makes perfect sense, right? I mean, my kids would all vote to get rid of hydrocarbons. I'm like, you do realize that you're living the greatest life on the planet of anyone because of hydrocarbons.
I'm just baffled. What do you think, Mark?
It baffles me as well, but I understand it.
Because we have kids.
Right.
Yeah. That's the explanation.
Yeah, totally.
Well, it's a bit exemplified by what we just talked about is, there's billions allocated to doing something that's really hard technically and mechanically, but that didn't stop kind of the build of euphoria and, more importantly, fundraising in the form of taxpayers supporting something like the IRA to charge off, no pun intended, on building 500,000 charging stations. And the expectation is you can do that overnight. And it's like what we're seeing with the pure play EV upstarts that are now teetering on extinction is that, after thinking about translating things to the physical world and actually doing things, building cars is hard. And so there's a big gap in terms of kind of the practical understanding of what all this means. And I'll tie it back to all of the linkages that you just cited to the lifestyle that we have today. But you're so outside of the everyday experience that you get into a political echo chamber that you have the luxury of spending all your time in.
We live in great times.
Yeah.
That is the answer. We live
Yeah.
in such a great time that our kids can say, I reject. Hey, first of all, thank you for the money, Dad.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend it the way I want to. And by the way, I'm going to spend some of my money fighting and erasing your legacy.
Yeah.
We live in great times.
I have just a bit of a sidebar, but I have to solve the funniest bumper sticker I've seen in a long time. And you rarely see them now, but there was this tricked out, jacked up Excursion.
Oh,
Remember the Ford Excursion?
who doesn't?
Yeah.
Bumper sticker. I identify as a Prius.
Nice.
Touche.
Nice. There's actually a great book that I'll pimp. It's called Factfulness. The short version is Swedish doctor, traveled all around the world, helping out sick people in poor areas, and actually came away with, the world's way better off than it is. And so he pulls all this UN data, and he created a test with 13 different questions. A, B, C were the answers. He routinely would get, and questions were like, what's the average number of years of education that men have versus women? And, that everybody assumes, oh, well, men get 17 years of education and women get 1, that the world's that better off. It's actually like 10 and 9. So his point is he would give this quiz to UN, to bankers, lawyers, all these really smart groups, and routinely the average number of questions that people got right were 1 and 2. So if you were a random monkey, you would get 4, right? If you were just randomly choosing. But the point is the world is in much better shape than we all realize. That what we define as poverty today was rich in 1900. So, and hydrocarbons have done that.
Let's end on a summer focused note. What are
Okay.
you guys doing this summer? Any travel plans? Anything fun? Where are we going to spend our oil and gas revenues this summer?
So I am actually going to go to Australia with a cameraman and check out the Beetaloo Basin.
Damn.
And I'm going to come back with footage. I will start my adventure in Darwin, Australia. That's my big trip for the
Damn.
summer.
Damn.
I've got a couple of things. I'm returning after your hiatus to my north of the border walleye fishing excursion up in Ontario, which is so I'll be burning some gasoline on the fast pontoon, and then
What are
I
you
am going to be
fishing for? What are you fishing for?
walleye pike.
Walleye pike.
Best
Okay.
eating freshwater fish there is, in my opinion. But it's
Damn.
more about the shore lunch and the shore lunch martini. But also burning some jet fuel. Returning to Europe for mostly a international baseball tour. Going to
Oh,
get to see.
the Sun's playing in Europe.
Yeah, we're playing. There's 3 city stops. Prague is first. Vienna is second. We wind up in Munich.
Dude, that is fantastic. I'm headed to Scotland. I mean, Nantucket, of course.
Right.
Got to
Of
check
course.
on.
We'll
Got to
work
check
on the technology to patch you in.
Yeah, please do. And then I'm going over to Scotland to play some golf.
Nice.
So it's my first Scottish golf trip. Even though I've been there a lot, I've never actually brought my clubs. This time it's going to be all about golf. So I'm excited.
Yeah, I
Love
went
Scotland.
to Scotland when I was in college, and we made the trek all the way to the Loch Ness.
Yeah, been there.
And we may or may not have had
Sucks.
some roadies on the way.
Did you
I
see
was
Nessie?
not driving.
So you saw Nessie.
I saw Nessie.
So, are you playing Trump International outside of Aberdeen?
No, but I stayed there when I was back at Shell, and I got ratioed. Everyone, of course, all the Dutch were like, they could not believe I stayed there. They were like, "You are the worst person ever." I was like, "It's amazing. I'm in a castle, and no one's here." It was actually fantastic. I was like, I had the whole run of the place.
So, I played there 5 years ago, and the kind of the tension is
There's tension.
is pretty palpable. But at that time, I don't know if it's changed. There was a massive Scottish flag flying that was outsized in terms of regulation, and apparently they're getting fined daily for every day they find that fly that flag. I don't know if it's still flying. And the other was, I think they're
Is the Scottish flag anti-Trump or pro-Trump?
well, he's
Or Trump is flying it just because he
just in defiance of this is, you know,
This
I
is a
want to fly
stupid
this
rule.
big,
Okay, I got it.
this very, very big Scottish flag, and you can see it all over the course. The other one is, and I don't remember exactly the orientation, but there's a homestead built up on a bluff that I believe they planted some trees in front of to block the view of the
Okay.
course. And so those trees were looking sickly when I was there, and the owner had erected a super tall flagpole on top of which he was flying the Mexican flag.
Love it.
That's awesome. All right. Thanks for tuning in this week. Everybody wish me luck. I'm having nasal surgery tomorrow. So
Oh, wow.
I will be out of commission, but hopefully I'll be able to breathe again. If you enjoyed the show, pass it on to a friend, give us a good comment, and we'll see you soon.